A message about the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky.
Every day we face a growing number of global calamities: homelessness, worldwide hunger, shocking numbers of deaths by violence, rising unemployment, the AIDS epidemic. That's the bad news. The good news is there's one thing we can do to make all these problems go away. Ignore the environment. If we don't pay attention to our environment, we won't have any problems to worry about. We won't have a planet. The Natural Resources Defense Council has been tirelessly protecting every aspect of the environment for over 20 years. They are practical, tough-minded, dogged group of lawyers and scientists who have not only been responsible for shaping environmental law, but policing it as well.
In 1990, after a decade of advocacy, NRDC helped push through tough changes to the Clean Air Act. We're currently working hard to end the massive energy waste in the U.S., the primary cause of air pollution and global warming. NRDC is making sure we can all breathe a little easier.
This year, we sued and beat Texaco when they illegally dumped thousands of gallons of polluted waste into the Delaware River. NRDC's battles against the oil drilling industry have staved off oil development in the environmentally sensitive areas of Alaska, New England, Florida Keys, and California, areas where an oil spill disaster could wipe out an entire ecological system, fishing industry, or way of life.
Our brotherhood of man.
The idea that America is made up of wide open spaces is a myth. Hi, I'm Dennis Weaver. Most of the country's remaining open spaces are being threatened. We're destroying much of what's left of our public rangelands and forests with mining, overgrazing by livestock, and excessive logging. The cowboy who once sang, "Give me land, lots of land, 'neath the starry skies above," may have to settle for a condo near the mall.
We've won wilderness status for millions of acres of our federal lands around the country, and we've prevented the government from clear-cutting our magnificent forests in places like California's Sierra Nevada and Montana's Yellowstone. We're making sure that our public lands, all that are left of the wide open spaces of our national myths and songs, are preserved for future generations.
You may say I'm a dreamer.
Global warming is the most serious environmental issue facing us today. Each year we add 6 to 8 billion tons of carbon to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels and destroying the forests. This, along with other heat-trapping chemicals, is creating what's commonly known as the greenhouse effect. If we continue to produce these gases at the current rate, global warming could cause sea levels to rise, flooding out millions of people who live in coastal areas. We're also depleting the ozone layer. If we lose just 10%, it'll mean an increase of 300,000 new cases of skin cancer every year. In essence, humanity is conducting an unintended, uncontrolled, globally pervasive experiment whose ultimate consequences could be second only to a worldwide nuclear war.
NRDC was the first American environmental organization to respond to the threats of global warming and ozone depletion. In fact, in the 1970s, we successfully sued the government to ban aerosol sprays. More recently, we helped shape the Global Warming Treaty, signed by over 150 countries at the Earth Summit. Energy reforms pioneered by NRDC staff are now saving literally billions of dollars in energy costs while improving the environment. There's no clear demonstration that environmental protection and economic progress can go hand in hand. To some, the challenge of stopping destruction of our planet's thin, life-sustaining layer of air is daunting. To us, there's no other choice than to take it on and succeed.
So you can see, because of the NRDC, the situation is not hopeless. As we become more conscious of our environmental problems, we as individuals can really make a difference. But until all governments, businesses, and individuals take their full share of responsibility, we need the NRDC to bring the world back from the brink of environmental disaster and preserve it for our children.
I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
The NRDC is a multinational, nonprofit force of nature, First established in 1970, they now have over 3 million members, including thousands of scientists and a team of over 700 attorneys in offices across the globe. Since its inception, the National Resource Defense Council has become the sword and shield of resource management authorities and environmental activists alike. Their achievements have been monumental, and their members have not only helped influence global policies and regulations, but in many cases they have quite literally written them. This iconic institution has fought everyone, from governments to private businesses, and even individual citizens in courtrooms all across the First and Second World, winning victory after victory as their unparalleled march towards regulatory-based environmental management has long since established the NRDC as the planet Earth's very own attorney at law. Picking up the bill, settlements and court decisions aside, has been a revolving door of non-governmental organizations, private institutions, and fundraising philanthropists, hosting private parties and corporate networking events for various causes at museums and art galleries in every major city from New York to Beijing. Meanwhile, in the Third World, something very different has been happening. In absence of a strong legal system to enforce such regulations, environmental changes had to occur through a very different mechanism altogether. Along with the IMF, for over a decade, the World Bank, under the leadership of Robert McNamara, had been structuring conditional loans to poor countries, creating an inescapable debt cycle for every government who opened up a package marked poverty reduction, only to find that within 2 decades, their resources would belong to someone else, and their people would be locked into a cycle of perpetual dependency on aid and international trade agreements that would prove to be anything but free. By 1987, the former energy tycoon turned ambassador to China and later director of the CIA was concluding his second term as vice president. And around the globe, the most collaborative international initiative in history was being constructed to address a not-so-new concern that would soon change everything. That same year, Biosphere 2 broke ground on an idea achieved and conceptualized by an activist theater group turned Biospherians during a visionary retreat with Aurelio Pache. Meanwhile, in Colorado, a New World Conservation Bank was formulated out of Huxley's old IUCN with backing by renowned global financier Edmund de Rothschild. This took place at the soon-to-be legendary Fourth World Conservation Conference, an annual event and one of so many forums Strong would take part in on the road to Rio, all of which were established to make progress toward a series of predetermined goals. You see, after almost a decade of setbacks and developmental deregulation in the West, the environmental revolution was in a state of near frenzy, and as the Cold War finally began winding down, a new war to fight global warming was rising up on campuses everywhere. Environmental and social justice law had long since gained prominence, and with media giants and Hollywood royalty leading this new charge, the road to Rio would redefine the terms of sustainability forever. Each of these forums and committees would ensure that only people and organizations who helped to build the road would actually have any sort of say in what direction it would go. Perhaps most recognizable is the European Management Forum, who, also in 1987, changed their name and hosted the first annual World Economic Forum. Maurice Strong would go on to help direct the WEF and remained as a long-term advisor, believing the World Economic Forum to be among the most effective vehicles for change the world has ever known. It's important to remember, there are dozens and have been hundreds of these forums, institutions, clubs, mentorship programs, and leadership training seminars around the world. Each event acts as a distribution channel for curated information, cultivating a collective consensus determined by a very short list of the same few usual suspects. We'll now take a closer look at this list, beginning with the founder of the United Nations Foundation, and easily one of the most entertaining and influential human beings the world has ever known.
From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Ted Turner is here. Earlier today, he announced a $200 million partnership with the United Methodist Church and Lutheran World Relief to fight malaria. The Protestant groups have been working overseas to fight poverty and prevent disease for more than a century. Ted Turner created the United Nations Foundation 10 years ago with a historic $1 billion gift to support UN causes and activities. I am pleased to have him here back at this table. Let's go back to the UN speech. So nuclear proliferation, let's end all nuclear weapons, and the United States has to start.
Yes.
And every country, Israel has to come on board, and Pakistan has to come on board, and Russia has to come on board,
and
France,
Nigeria,
and China, and everybody.
Yeah.
All right. So you accomplished that. What's the second highest priority?
The second biggest thing is global climate change.
Okay.
We've got to, and for so many reasons, we've got to move off of fossil fuel. One is they are running out, and they will run out. They're going to get constantly more expensive. And particularly with oil, we don't have we don't have hardly any oil. So we're transferring all our wealth to the Middle East.
And we don't have refineries either, by the way.
Right, well, that's another thing. And security, for financial and military security, we need to be more self-sufficient in our fuel, because if we ever get another boycott, which could happen like it did when Carter was president,
OPEC boycott.
We'll be stuck. So there are so many reasons why we need to do that. It'll be good for employment. We'll be employed hundreds of thousands of people here in the United States building new power plants that are solar and wind and possibly some nuclear plants. It'll be good for the economy. So getting a new energy regime is the second most important
What's
thing.
possible? Tell me what's
It's possible
to do.
That in 15 or 20 years we can completely redo it. If we have to mobilize, this is how important it is, and how important that we do it quickly. We have to mobilize the same way we did when we entered World War II in 1941. We have to fully mobilize everything we have and put it into changing the energy system over. And not just here in the United States, but all over the world. It's going to be the biggest business project in the history of the world. Fortunes, billions of dollars are going to be made. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to be employed. We're going to have clean air. We're going to have so many benefits from it. It's not going to cost us anything. Once we get going with it, it's not going to cost us anything. Only the people that don't understand it think it's going to. Not doing it will be catastrophic. We'll have 8 degrees. We'll be 8 degrees hotter in 30 or 40 years, and basically none of the crops will grow. Most of the people will have died, and the rest of us will be cannibals. Civilization will have broken down. What the few people who are left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan, and living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. Not doing it is suicide. Just like dropping bombs on each other, nuclear weapons is suicide. So we've got to stop doing the two suicidal things, which are hanging on to our nuclear weapons
and global
and then after that we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
A decade before this interview, Robert Edward Turner III, known by most as Ted, found himself standing on top of an empire he had built with his own 2 hands. One of which he now found himself using to sign a pledge that would provide $1 billion directly to the UN Secretary General over the next 10 years. If we look back one more decade before this, we would find the largest landowner in America in a state of total media network domination, as well as newfound marital bliss with the would-be love of his life, famed Hollywood icon and actress Jane Fonda. But even if we go back yet another decade, in the time before Ted had revolutionized TV journalism, we'd still find him on top of the world as a competitive sailing legend in the making, who was also in the process of turning around 2 failing sports teams and transitioning a bankrupt billboard company into a media empire. Ted was often inspired by the lives and careers of great men like William Randolph Hearst and Howard Hughes. But while he admired their drive and accomplishments, the forever tarnished legacies left in their wake would drive him forward throughout his own life with an undying motivation to use his tremendous fortune for good. Ted's would be a legacy to encourage action. Outspoken and unapologetic, he shared his spotlight with the causes he cared most about, inspiring an entire generation to lead, follow, or get out of the way. A famous rivalry with Rupert Murdoch completely reshaped the Fourth Estate in America and redefined the very concept of news throughout the world. With minute-to-minute coverage, media networks had transitioned televisions into a window where people could now watch history being reported live. And as walls were falling and wars were being waged from the comfort of our own living rooms, the entire world couldn't look away. 24-hour news made more than a splash. It caused a tsunami, and Ted had somehow managed to ride these waves of change as they crashed across each opponent for decades, before eventually receding to find him on the brink of a new millennium, staring out over a world he had conquered, and finding himself in a very new and unique position to save it.
Undersecretary General, do you have a title beyond that, or just Undersecretary?
Executive Coordinator for Reform.
And the reform's going.
This is I'm a volunteer. I'm a volunteer.
I got you. You don't get paid, like me.
Paid in satisfaction.
You know. Oh, he's no Barbara Powell. I know very well.
Yes. Pleasure.
I think I'm going to have an opportunity to congratulate you. Yeah.
Terrific. Where do you want us to sit, boss?
I think they want to take a
picture.
picture.
Okay.
First, they want to take a picture.
We're going to have dinner tonight, huh?
Yeah, that's true. And you're being on.
I think, yes, sir. Thank you. Will you shake my hand? Congratulations on the great job. And you've been reading about the reforms that you got going. And I
should congratulate you for what you're getting.
But I'm going to hold my breath till the U.S. pays up.
You have to keep paying.
I'm not going to breathe until they pay. Yeah. Well, we're going to have Bill Richardson there.
Yeah, Bill will be there.
With us.
You know, you met my...
Yes, yes, thank you.
Why did you sit there? You and Miss Wright.
Bill? Let's sit in the middle. Well, I have incredible news today. And I made a decision in the last couple of days, and I've talked to Maurice. I've decided that I'm going to offer my services to help you raise money from individuals and corporations around the world. We'll have to create a new organization because the UN cannot receive money from individuals.
Not only would Maurice help this fellow rancher and eccentric billionaire environmentalist set up the UN Foundation, he would also sit on the board of directors, helping to spend the money with a gratitude later expressed in his turn-of-the-century memoir, Where on Earth Are We Going?, in which he writes, "Many of the privileged minority do take their responsibility to society seriously. They manifest this by their support of charitable and voluntary organizations. Particularly noteworthy are George Soros, who donates hundreds of millions of dollars a year through his Open Society Foundation, and the billionaire media genius Ted Turner, who made the largest single charitable contribution in U.S. history by committing $1 billion to support the United Nations programs." Maurice then goes on to clarify, his generosity has since been topped by the computer software king, Bill Gates, the first person ever to have his personal net worth reach $100 billion. They follow in the tradition of the great philanthropists of the past, notably the Rockefeller family, which continues in its current generation to set a remarkable example of enlightened and innovative philanthropic leadership. Overall, the charitable giving reached $135 billion in the United States in 1997. And by the time this book was published, the Gates Foundation had firmly established itself as a world leader in charitable fundraising. Within 10 years, Bill Gates will have ascended many levels beyond software king to the rank of global philanthropic god. But before we move forward into the new millennium, where Maurice will find himself with his hand caught in a very uncomfortable cookie jar, and Ted will see both his health and fortunes fade, let's look back at the road to Rio through the eyes of some of its most interesting characters.
Live from the entertainment capitals of the world, it's Showbiz Today, the CNN Entertainment News Journal, with Bella Shaw in Hollywood and Lauren Sidney in New York.
Lauren, I wish you were here last night because stars gathered here in Hollywood to celebrate a new cartoon created by Ted Turner, Captain Planet and the Planeteers. And as Sherry Sylvester reports, this animated series carries with it a very timely message.
Most of the experts say if we don't change things, the planet will be pretty well uninhabitable in another 30 or 40 years.
John Ratzenberger of Cheers and the Wonder Years' Danica McKellar represented the age span of actors on hand, but there was no generation gap among stars backing Captain Planet and the Planeteers. The mission of these eco-heroes is to entertain the cartoon crowd as they battle the pillagers and plunderers of the planet Earth. Many say the time is right for the socially conscious superheroes.
I think it's wonderful because our children are our future, and if we can start them at a very early age being responsible and getting the message across through entertainment, then the whole generation is going to grow up caring about the planet.
Kids need to know about what's happening in the environment and what they can do to make it better.
What's your position? Have you taken a position on population?
Honorary Planeteers were given their own home ecology kits, complete with trees to plant, and many say they are already practicing environmentalists.
It's clear to me that it's the children, and in my own home, in fact, it's my children who say, you know, don't reuse that plastic bag and don't throw that newspaper away, recycle it. And I think that they're the ones that will remind their parents of how to do it right.
We have trash cans in our back, and we're going to start recycling and reusing things. We've always recycled glass and paper and whatever else we can recycle, so we're still doing that. And we just think about, using the water, not using too much, and taking shorter showers and doing whatever we can.
The cartoon will begin airing September 15th in 60 countries around the world, and the stars behind the planet hope to carry a message that is universal, that everyone has the power to save the environment. Sherry Sylvester, CNN Entertainment News, Hollywood.
Very great honor and privilege to introduce my best friend, my boss, and the man who truly did put the vision back into television, Ted Turner.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, and thank you for helping us with the program. About 2 years ago, Lester Brown of World Watch Institute, who prepares a book called State of the World each year, and I chatted just prior to Christmas. And Lester told me that the latest year's research gave he and the rest of the Institute the information that the planet, we didn't have 30 or 40 years to reverse our actions before the planet collapsed. We had 1 decade. And he was despairing because he's been working, as many of us have, to try and get environmental subjects in the school system and on the educational agenda. And he said, Ted, there's not even time to get it on the educational agenda. So I went home during the Christmas holidays and I walked in the woods a little, and I wondered what we were going to do. And then the idea struck me that what we need to do is come up with a children's animated series that tells the story and leapfrog the schools and go directly to the children. That we could do. And then but it's not just a problem here in the United States, it's a problem all over the world. So we had to get on the television networks in all the world and leapfrog the schools all over the world. And we've already cleared Captain Planet in over 60 nations, 180 stations here in the United States. Hopefully by the time that we start the international feed, sometime around the first of the year on a delay after we do it here, we'll have 100 nations at least on board, because the environment is everybody's business. And hopefully this program will make a big difference. If it doesn't, there isn't much future for the species, because most of the experts say if we don't change things, the planet will be pretty well uninhabitable in another 30 or 40 years. So what we're doing is very, very important. I'm glad just to be a small part of it. The rest of I think a really excellent job has been done by the creative people, the animators. It's being done in the Orient, and by the people who volunteered their time to be voices. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that Captain Planet and the Planeteers can save the planet. Thank you very much.
Often overlooked on calendars and in history books alike is the tremendous amount of effort, money, and time spent ensuring 1990 would become the first International Earth Day. In order to better grasp the true scale of vision and tremendous scope of unifying purpose we're witnessing here, I think it's important to go back a little further in the timeline. Some say this story began in 1962 with the release of Silent Spring, a series of world-stopping articles first run in The New Yorker, leading to the best-selling book with a reprint including a preface by Julian Huxley. In this work, Carson offers readers a beautifully presented series of important questions. On one hand, innovation had led to a dramatic rise in both quality of life and longevity, but on the other, biologists were seeing some very concerning evolutionary signals in the ecosystem. These concerns had been growing among naturalists for a while, but it wasn't until the paperback revolution of the baby boom era that writers like Huxley, Mead, and Carson were finally able to translate the complex scholarly discourse surrounding these issues into shorter, more digestible literature for public consumption.
This is one of the nation's best sellers, first printed on September 27, 1962. Up to now, 500,000 copies have been sold, and Silent Spring has been called the most controversial book of the year. Biologist Rachel Carson, who also wrote The Sea Around Us, worked 4 years in the preparation of Silent Spring. What she wrote started a national quarrel.
Chemicals are the sinister and little recognized partners of radiation in changing the very nature of the world.
The crux, the fulcrum over which the argument chiefly rests is that Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature, that he has already disrupted the balance of nature by his overburgeoning numbers, his cities and his airports and his roads and the way of his life.
Good evening. We are living in what has been called the synthetic age, the age of the atom, the missile, the frozen TV dinner. In the next hour, you will hear that this is also the age of the wormless apple and the calculated risk.
The words up and down relate to this flat concept of the world. The words up and down have no meaning when we're dealing in a spherical Earth. And the spherical Earth is moving, rotating, moving on through space all the time. We're all aboard of a spaceship.
After the U.S. government weighed in, following up on this debate with regulatory restrictions, environmental concerns became a political boiling point. Still, many others felt these concerns were a distraction from far more pressing matters. Remember, this was a time of racial tensions, women's liberation, and the world's largest population living under a constant threat of nuclear destruction. And while many treated these issues as separate, some others drew a familiar circle around them, and soon Earth Week was born.
This planet is threatened with destruction, and we who live in it with death. The heavens reek, the waters below are foul, children die in infancy, and we and the world, which is our home, live on the brink of nuclear annihilation. We are in a crisis of survival.
This is a CBS News special, Earth Day. A Question of Survival, with CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Books like The Population Bomb, Limits to Growth, and Only One Earth were quickly becoming the same inspirational force on campuses that Silent Spring had been to most recent graduates. Of course, this included founders of the NRDC, who had gained international notoriety after successfully compelling the EPA. And with financing from Lawrence Rockefeller and Hollywood heavyweight Robert Redford, the next step ahead in this long march to victory was the Celebrity Ambassador.
And in the earlier years, there was not a big population of environmental activists. And so you were up against tremendous odds. I needed to consolidate my energies behind a group that I felt had the most power. And that was NRDC, because they had the power to sue. They had the power to go to court. I believe in NRDC, and I think that this wouldn't be here. They wouldn't be the group they are without the membership. They wouldn't be the group they are without the collective power of people believing that they have an organization that can represent their interests, which is the public interest.
And represent they did. The NRDC would go on to dominate land, sea, and air, until finally in 1987 the world reached a consensus that a consensus was needed. Redford tapped Maurice Strong to direct his Institute for Resource Management and host the 1989 Sundance Symposium on Climate Change, an event that would set the stage for Rio and also ensure all upcoming anniversary Earth Day activities would revolve around this new threat of global annihilation that the entire world could share.
Moments ago, Mother Earth was rushed to this hospital where a team of specialists have gathered to determine the extent of her illness.
Our environment is in jeopardy. Somebody has to do something.
Network presidents agree. Environmental programming is a must for the 90s.
The hoopla of Earth Day is over. The problems remain. Only time will tell if these demonstrations accomplished anything. But let's summarize the points that were brought home today to a lot of people who have missed the point so far. For instance, the militants who see all this as an establishment trick to divert attention from what to them are more urgent concerns like civil rights or like Vietnam. They seem to have missed the point that there are no civil rights or peace in a lifeless world. For instance, the politicians who see this as a safe crusade, they seem to have missed the point that it will involve treading on more special interests than ever in our history. For the first time, they may even have to come out against motherhood. For instance, those in industry who see the crisis as only the hysterical creation of do-gooders, they've missed the point if they haven't heard the unanimous voice of the scientists warning that halfway measures and business as usual cannot possibly pull us back from the edge of the precipice. For instance, the too silent majority. The greatest disappointment today was the degree of non-participation across the country, and especially the absence of adults. And the young people who did participate were in a skylark mood, which contrasted rudely with the messages of apocalypse. Those who ignored Earth Day, well, that's one thing. Those who ignore the crisis of our planet, that's quite another. The indifferent have missed the point that to clean up the air and earth and water in the few years science says is left to us means personal involvement and may mean personal sacrifice, the likes of which Americans have never been asked to make in time of peace. The sense of today's teach-in was that America must undertake a revolution in its way of life. Affluent America will, we were told, almost certainly have to scale down its standards of living, give up having as many cars, as many children, as many cans, as many conveniences, as much conspicuous consumption. Someday, we heard today, the world will be a better place if it listens and acts. But in the meantime, perhaps for a generation or more, it will be frighteningly costly to each of us to clean up the mess each of us has made. But the cost of not doing so is more frightening. That's what today's message really means. And those who marched today, and those who slept, and those who scorned are in this thing together. What is at stake and what is in question is survival. This is Water Crime Guide. Good night.